our IPM at Poelman apiaries. So it's nothing special. It's something that we found that works for us in our area. One thing that you'll find is that different areas have different things. What works for us in the south doesn't not necessarily work by the northern farms close to Edmonton. Different than even in Seven Persons. This is an aerial photo of a bee farm that we have in Seven Persons. And the only reason I liked it is because you could probably count 10 quarters of canola there. So that's really good. I wasn't sure if I should title it this or not, but wisdom, knowledge, or just dumb luck. And it's a little bit of all three. And the dumb luck is pretty self-explanatory. Sometimes we just make decisions and we just happen to make the right one just by chance and by circumstances that happen to us. Knowledge is, what we've been taught, what we've read. Wisdom, I actually Googled it a while ago because everything you Google is true. But it's life experiences. It's what we learn from each other when we talk to our neighbor. It's what went wrong for us and we find a different way to do it. It's wisdom comes from 35 years of keeping bees in the south. You learn what doesn't work and you learn some things that do work. And we're still constantly learning, but always being willing to learn from anyone, because we can learn from anybody. So we still have lots to learn. And so at Poelman apiaries, bee health is number one. First of all, we're mostly pollination in the south, probably 70 to 80%. But we still need good bees. And the reason we think bee health is number one, because if you have strong bees, it makes your splitting, your checking queens, everything easier, winter losses. If you have low winter losses, everything's easier. And then the bees are ready for honey production if there is a honey flow. And there's not always a honey flow. Last year was not the best year for us neither, but still trying to keep good bees. These are the list of priorities that we kind of came up with. Training staff is very important. And I'm going to go through these with different slides, but sampling for pests and disease, starting with Varroa control, Nosema, AFB. We do use some spring supplements. Sugar is very important, as everybody knows. Genetics, shelter, good locations, and equipment and frame rotation. And I have to remember, I don't have a slide for it, but I promised Curtis that we do use one unregistered product that's very effective for Varroa. So just make sure I don't forget to share it with you. Training is integral to our success. We have a lot of employees. I mean, when we started, it started with me going to the bees and training people, and then training people to train people. But now, so often it's out of our hands. So like the last couple of years, we'll get everybody from our Fort Macleod farm, and we'll bring people from the Seven Persons farm also to Fort Macleod and have a training day with them, because we're trying to make sure that they can identify diseases and everything that they need to be aware of. We actually use the Bee app, so I was trying to find a way to show that slide there for the Bee app, but we plug it in and use it on a projector, and we used it to train our foreign workers and some of our Canadians also. Also, training with field days, and we've had some really good field days over the years. If in the past, we've had training days with pollination companies. When Matt Hat was the provincial apiculturist, we had some of our first good training days with beekeepers with him. When we worked to get Shelley her position, we also had some really good field days in bee yards, and I was always amazed that nobody got stung. So sampling is important, and I know a lot of this is redundant because we talked about all afternoon, because we talked about Varroa quite a bit, and it is our number one nemesis. We used to test for Nosema. We used to test for tracheal mite, and we don't test for tracheal mite anymore, so that microscope sits there. We used to test for Nosema. We don't do that either anymore, unless there's a reason for us to do it, but we don't do it on a regular basis. but we do sample. We sample all the time. Usually we sample in the field after we've treated or during treatment. I don't get so excited about sampling before we treat, because we know we're going to treat. We know we need to treat, because threshold for Varroa mites has always been 3%, or some people might say it's a little bit less, but really if you're not getting zeros, you're going to be in trouble real soon, because if you're going to get 3%, it goes up so fast, you need to get zero. So we really do sample, and generally what we're doing is sampling two hives on a yard. And when they go to the field, they're probably doing 50% of the yards. Sampling does take time, but over the big picture, it gives us a real good idea where the trend is. So last fall, about over 90% of our samples would have been below the 3%, but there was the odd spike. And we're aware of that, and that's the first sign of potential problems down the road. In the spring for Varroa control, we use Apivar. We've been using that for quite a while. We will be sampling as soon as it's done again. We have done Formic Acid to follow up Apivar in the spring, or before when we had trouble with check mite, we followed up with Formic Acid. And using it in the spring, it was really good at killing drone layers. We had nothing but queenless hives afterwards. Never found a drone layer, didn't have to find any old crappy queens because they were all dead. But we only did it 1 year, found it too hard on the bees to use Formic Acid in the spring, so right now we're sticking with Apistan, and then Apivar, thanks for the correction. Now in the fall, and I'm a little bit slow learner, but you see, I have a couple of partners in Ryan and Jeremy Olthoff, and Ryan is the one that got me to start looking at the VM vaporizer, because I don't change as quick as I used to anymore because I get set in my ways. But we've been using oxalic acid in the fall. For 20 years, we've been trying to stay away from resistance. We've always been using alternatives. And for 20 years, we used Formic Acid. We've tried a couple of other things, but we always used Formic Acid, and it stretched out the use of our miticides quite a bit, I think. But a couple of years ago, with sampling, we started to see a big difference between what Formic Acid would do and what oxalic acid would do. And it could have been the weather, because Formic Acid is really dependent on humidity, temperature, lots of different things. But oxalic acid does give us good results. We get good drops. And it's quick, so we've been doing that at all our farms in the fall now. This is something I had to learn from somebody else too, was no more antibiotics. And before Fumagillin was taken off the market, we were pretty much going to quit using it anyways, because of learning from talking to other people and another beekeeper that we trust and respect what he does. So. And we had been using Tylen, and that's what I learned. I'd heard that Scandi had quit using Tylen, and Philpotts had quit using Tylen, and I thought, well, man, if they've done it, no disrespect, Reese. we can do it, right? But I was slow. I didn't want to do it because, we didn't have trouble if we were using it all the time. Because AFB scares me, right? But we haven't used it for... I don't exactly remember, but it's 2 or 3 years now. And it is a real concern to have an AFB outbreak. One of my neighbors have had them. They catch you off guard, and that's why training is so important, because you've got to stay on top of it, because we don't see all those hives. And the Fumagillin, I was a little bit unsure if it was being effective anymore, but we've gone on to try a different product, and maybe it's not, what we're using is not a treatment, but it might be just to help keep the bees healthy. Also in the spring, we use Pollen Substitute. Ryan and Jeremy do use it in the north too, but I think it's more important in the south. I mean, our pollen is a little bit in shorter supply. Sometimes I'm not sure about the benefits that we get from it, depending on how soon we go out, depending on the spring. But we do like getting out early to treat our bees, and that's one of those things that come from just dumb luck, because before we started putting, Pollen Substitute helps us to get out to the bees early so that we put in our Apivar strips. But it all started 25 years ago when I first got Varroa mites. I found out around Christmas time. It kind of ruined my Christmas that we had Varroa mites or whatever, and I wasn't sure what we were going to do. So we got warm weather in January, and we started putting Apistan strips in. And ever since then, we've always treated early in the spring. And for me, it makes the most sense, because in the spring, your clusters are the smallest, you have the least amount of brood in your hives, and the Varroa mites are old. Generally they're not young ones, they're ones that have been overwintered, so they're more, my way of thinking, it's not scientific, but they're more vulnerable to the controls that we give them. So our new rule is, as it'll show in a little bit, is we start treating in March. We used to start early March, now we've slowed down because we don't think it's that effective. So we start, March 10th is the new rule, and it has to be above 0, because we're also doing other things at the same time, and it makes no sense to be disturbing the bees that much if it's too cool. So some of the supplements that we put on, we would do this drenching. We've been using Bee Strong. It's a product out of Austria, but it just helps to give strong, healthy bees. It's a brood booster, and it's a little bit hard to get. We found out about it through Brian Ash from Manitoba, and we find that we haven't had troubles with Nazim ever since we stopped using fumagillin. It's not a treatment, but I think it does help keep healthier hives, because a lot of things that make our hives vulnerable are stresses. And so if we can keep the mite load down and we can keep them healthy, some of these other things are not problems. We also use Pro Health. And I learned this year, we've been using Pro Health for quite a few years. And one of the reasons is because bees really love it, so it attracts them to sugar. So that helps, because sometimes if the bees are a little bit off their game, they're not feeling as good, or maybe they have some virus issues, they don't want to go to sugar that quick, so you can't stimulate them. But with Pro Health and with the lemongrass and the essential oils, it attracts them to it. We did use Complete Bee, but after listening to the talk at our annual convention, he didn't have much good to say about it. And that was, I can't remember the gentleman's name from Saskatchewan. Yeah, so I don't think we're going to use Complete Bee again. We're just going to stick with Pro Health. So March 10th is our go time. Southern Alberta doesn't get as much snow as you guys up here, but it does blow. So sometimes it's a bit of a challenge, because we have to dig hives out. And I don't know, I like showing this slide. But we have our own mini hoe. A couple of years ago, it was so bad that we dug for over a week with 3 mini hoes trying to dig the bees out, because we don't start in March usually. We'll wait till April to give it a chance to melt then, but it just wasn't going to melt. So then we had to dig them out, and some of them we had to dig out twice, because then the wind came again, blew snow again, and filled it all in. So one thing I'm not proud about is spring barrel feeding, and the only reason I put this into our IPM is because early spring feeding is important, but I think it's still a place where we can share diseases is in barrel feeding, but we're not a fan of frame feeders, and we're not a fan of using hive top feeders in the spring neither. So still, we haven't found an alternative to this, so this is the method that we use. In the fall, we use Hive Tops, and I've always used Hive Tops just because that's what I learned. So depending on who you work for and where you start, I started by Lewis Gredanis and Granham, and when they started overwintering, they started with Hive Tops, and that's what I've learned, and I've always done it. But for us, it's a good system, and because we can control how much sugar each hive gets, and there's not a lot of robbing. Genetics is also very important. I think that's a place where at Poelman Apiaries we could really improve yet. It's probably, we do purchase all our queens. It was probably, it's more than 5 years ago already, but 6, 7 years ago we tried raising queens once and had a couple of setbacks, and then made the choice not to pursue that route. You have to do what you're good at and what you're comfortable with, and at the time I still chose it was better to purchase queens, but with the price of queens it is a bit difficult, so it's costing quite a bit. I remember when I started pollinating bees in about 1995, we could purchase queens for $8, and for sure in June they were $8, and now they're close to $40. So they've gone up quite a bit, and it's a pretty big expense. But we found ways to, for stock replacement. Initially, we've increased a lot over the years to get to this point, and we did a little bit of it with packages, but most of it was on our own. But we definitely did take advantage of packages for a while and some nukes. But now we make all our own nukes, so generally we're making a 2-frame nuke the end of May, and we'll still put in a queen excluder on it and get between 1 and 2 boxes of honey off of them on average. And that's part of the justification of purchasing queens over making our own, because of the time that we lost, we weren't gaining any honey over it, so any honey off of those hives. So we chose to go with purchasing because we could pay for the queens that way. But there may be a time when we have to reevaluate that, or I need to listen or talk to somebody else about that, because I know lots of people have good methods that work for them. It's and then we winter those singles inside as singles, and then the next year they'll come outside and they'll be doubles. And that's kind of how we have a replacement thing. I kind of compare them to cows sometimes and say that the singles are like heifers, and then they become our replacements for next year. And for us, it's a good system. It does save us some money on that side. So the reason we did it is because it's not cash out of our pockets. Shelter is also very important. Southern Alberta, there's not a lot of shelter. That's one of the challenges. Up north, even just south of Edmonton, there's lots more trees, lots more bush. We don't have much shelter. And I think I picked up on this one from somebody else, and it was just some of that dumb luck and slowly over time, but we started building wind fences. And somewhere we took an advantage of an 8-foot wind fence, and we found out that you get a 10-foot drift, and trying to dig them out really sucks. But a 4-foot wind fence isn't so bad, because you might end up with a 5-foot drift. And so we, out of the, at our one location, I bet you we probably have 180 wind fences that we built over the years. And it was Jean Bergeron who told me once after a convention, and I was just starting to want to build a fence, and I was building them. For us, predominantly, it's a west wind, so we build it along the west. And Jean Bergeron said, well, I just happened to be in some home building store, and I seen if you put wings on your fence, you gain about 60%. So we started with wings, and it really makes a difference. The best bees are always the ones that are closest to the fence. You can see the difference. The only challenge is lots of times you have to dig them out if you've had a lot of blowing snow. But that's worth it if you have good bees, because good bees make all the difference. But we do find some locations with trees as well. The other thing that frame rotation, it's very important. And when I started keeping bees, I was told all you need is some terramycin, and you don't get rid of those old frames. But we all think different now, right? So we have a few good fires. I need a drink. You need a permit. I had the fire department show up on a Saturday one day, and they wanted me to put it out. and there was no changing their mind. So, but that's not just our frames. So we melt a lot of frames for other people. So we on the side we have a wax business, and that's grown over the years, and it's changed a lot too. I would imagine last year we probably melted over 250,000 frames for beekeepers. It's a dirty, nasty job, but there's lots of beekeepers that are cleaning up their operations by getting rid of old frames, putting in new frames. It only makes sense. And if you see sometimes how small the cells get, years ago people used to be, well, this frame is 30 years old, this frame's 50 years old, and they were proud of it. But now we should be a little bit embarrassed about how old some of them are, right? And to exchange them. The challenge we're having now is that we're starting to get more plastic foundation, and that's not very easy to melt. And what do you do with it? So we're trying to cross a few new bridges there with what to do with it. At first, we told people no more plastic because to get a permit, they asked me, are you burning any plastic? And I couldn't say no anymore. My conscience caught up to me, and I had, okay, so we started pulling the plastic out. Then you got this big pile of plastic. So what are you going to do with that? But this is just the wooden from the frame that they're burning there. And we build lots of new frames every year. We probably try and change 2 frames per hive a year, but I don't think we quite make it probably. But especially if they come home dead, there's a lot of frames that get thrown out. Oh, I guess I could have done that. So I went through that pretty quick. I was scared that I might panic a little bit and talk too fast. There's one thing that I think that we really miss, and I think Sam, you talked about it. What do we do with those old hives with full of Varroa, full of disease? What are we doing with them? So we can get rid of the frames, but what are we doing with the bees? And I mean, for years, people would just tell me, shake them out, bang them out. Well, no, that's a bunch of BS. Sorry. Because we don't do that with anything else. You don't take your crappy lambs and just shake them out with, or whatever. You get rid of them, right? You don't spread disease, right? You have to isolate it. And I've been lucky enough that I've had an unregistered product that I was telling Curtis about for quite a few years. And I ran out of it, but I just got some again. But we still have an old cyanic gas gun. I know, you're all hopeful, but anyways, it works really good on mites. Cyanic gas? They're all dead. All our deads come home, and it was almost like this fall. We found one hive for sure that probably they did a shake, and just out of the blue, 75 mites. So tell them, close the entrance, bring it home. Comes home, gas it, get rid of it, because we talk about hygienic bees and different things that bees can do, but sometimes the challenge is the mites too, because mites aren't supposed to kill their host, right? There's supposed to be a relationship there. We got to get rid of the bad mites too, and the best thing that can happen to them is to die. About 3 years ago, we were working with Monsanto, and Monsanto was working with a product that they were putting in the hives with RNAi, and it was to help to control Varroa. But the one thing I learned from working with them was they did a really good job. They sampled every hive in the yard, and they could follow. We'd have 10 pellets in the yard, 40 hives, and they could follow how the mites would spread. So this hive would have 7%, and how it would just spread from that hive and go out. And about 3 years ago, we had a really hard winter, and all those crappy hives that were kind of a little bit on the edge, they never got to fly. The bees never got to go somewhere else. They just died. Best thing for them. And I think the more we could do with our sick, our duds, our the ones that don't want to build up, is just kill them. And if there's something wrong with the frames, get rid of them too. It's just better for the whole system. So the last thing that I was asked to share if we have any tips or any things that we do at Poelman Apiaries, and I didn't come up with very many because I think the majority of us talk enough that we're all doing something similar, right? Not telling you anything new. We also struggle with bears a lot in southern Alberta, which would be hard for you to imagine, but southwest corner. We probably have over 100 locations with electric fences. And I have a rancher friend that has 3.5-inch drill stem out of fiberglass. And it works really good, no more insulators. So this one fence here in the river bottom, it's all fiberglass posts. Even the little posts in the gates, they're all fiberglass. Not everybody has access to it, but I mean, when we use the wire and we wrap it around the post, we just put a sheet metal screw to hold the wire onto the post, and no insulators. Because fencing is not an enjoyable thing. We've gotten good at it. We have our own post pounder, and we've been doing it for 20 years probably. But and that's another thing. When I started keeping bees, I started in about 85, 87 on my own, and never had Varroa mites, only had to worry about AFB, and never had bears. And now we have well over 100 locations with bears, and over half of them are with grizzly bears. Like, I mean, how things change is crazy. But so our fencing, the only thing that I could think of that's new at Poelman Apiaries is fences, and I got to take a minute and try and sell a trailer. So currently we could probably sell you one of 10 or 15 different trailers. Abe Klassen works in our 7-persons farm, and in the winter he builds trailers. And last year he built 2 of those single axle trailers on the left on the bottom there, and we sold one right away. And was hoping to sell the second one. Built it on spec, never did. And he had nothing to do this winter, so he built 2 more tandem axle trailers, kind of like you see there on the center and on the right. So you don't have to buy a new one. You can buy one of our old ones. We'll keep the new ones. So.
Are they on sale?
They tilt decks.
On sale?
We can give you terms. Everything's on sale, Landon. You know that. So. This final side is Zecoma quambili, and probably only one person here knows what that is. It's thank you very much in Bwanji. If you wanted to say it in Tumbuka, it's Tawanga Chaumeni. One of Adam Oving's favorite sayings to me used to be Katemwa and Chito Yani, means I love my job, which meant he really didn't like his job very much, but so he went off on his own. That's just some of the words I've learned, but that's all, folks.